Actually, before I read what today's topic is going to be, I always plan to do this, I never ever do, and that is I'm going to ask you, if you're watching this and you're enjoying it, or you're getting something out of it, or you've watched more than like a few minutes, can you please like, comment and subscribe? I can't believe I'm also now one of those many millions of people saying that. Okay, so today's topic is preparation for revelation. Preparation for revelation. Alrighty, let's see what we got. Greetings and thank you for that statement. And yes, once again, we also appreciate that you are choosing to go with our inspiration. And if you wish to adopt this as your model going forward, then of course we would be quite happy to do it in this format. Also, we would like to say that it is still possible, and you are still, of course, invited to bring questions when you have them. So, preparation for revelation. We have decided to inspire you with this statement because now is the quickening. It is the beginning of the changes that are going to ignite the Renaissance, the explosion in human potential being realized. And although right now, as we have said before, there is a decline in civilization, a decline in the infrastructure and the superstructure which supports your societies. This necessary part of the process to precede the Renaissance, which ultimately precedes the ascension, the rebirth, is going to have in it, in a very integral way, a disclosure of the hidden truths, the forbidden knowledge, the dark secrets which have been kept from humanity. And some of these are going to be so paradigm shattering and so fantastical that for many it will be difficult to accept they could be possibly true. So, we wish to lay some foundation, some expectation that will prepare you for when this process gathers momentum, because it is already underway. And those that spend more of their time on the fringe of media, more focused on the alternative providers of current relevant content rather than the mainstream, are already preparing themselves for this revelation and are already in a state of preparedness where they will take it within to their field of consideration more readily than others. But of course, not all shall. If you are here watching this now and you think that it is possible that a human being could channel a different consciousness to provide wisdom which is not necessarily that of the channel, then you are already open in your thinking. And so for you, the transition also probably will be more easy than for the greater majority. Yet, even for you, there will be some information which will be challenging. So, let us begin in this way. The human mind and experience has been very confined, very controlled. So, if you were to think of it this way, the human experience, as it is permitted on your planet, follows a very narrow lane. And what is considered to be possible is only what can be imagined would happen within this lane. And so the mind of the human has been blinkered in much the same way that a horse is blinkered, so that what is occurring outside in the periphery does not make it into the awareness of the horse, does not make it into the awareness of the human. This has been done very deliberately and very skillfully, so that there is not only no awareness of what is occurring outside of this narrow lane, but there is no feeling that there is something out there, because the mind has been so shuttered that there is not even the contemplation that there is something very alternative to what the mainstream is dictating. And also, as part of this indoctrination mechanism, is the policing of oneself, so that you do not look outside of this narrow lane. And if you do have any thoughts, or you see those around you having any thoughts of looking outside of this narrow lane, then you self-admonish. And you admonish those around you that are looking outside of this narrow lane. Now, we do not speak of you specifically, because if you are here now watching this, then already that tells us that you are prepared to look outside of the lane. But we just wish to lay the framework, the blueprint of how this works. So, when there is this locking, this blinkering of the mind, such that it can see only down this narrow lane, then when anything occurs outside and then is presented to the individual, it is outrightly dismissed, because if it cannot occur within the imagination of the individual, then it cannot exist. And you can see that is a very absurd way to live. It is a very small and narrow realm of existence. And it's very easy to illustrate that is so. For example, an individual may hear that there is a space program currently on Earth which is traveling outside of the solar system frequently, rapidly, and has bases on other planets within the solar system, and is doing commerce, forms of trade with other species, and are also mining in other regions of this galaxy. On hearing this information and comparing it to the reality which they have been permitted to perceive, which is that there is a space program on planet Earth which has not been to the moon for a very long time and does nothing more significant than to take manned flights which go into orbit and send unmanned satellites which leave the solar system but then nothing beyond that. So given that is the realm of which they are permitted to believe through a very deliberate engineering, then hearing this other, much more extravagant version of human space travel does not occur within their imagination, and so it is rejected. However, the reason that this is very easy to prove as being a very small and narrow view of the world is that there is an infinite universe. And in this infinite universe, there is an infinite number of universes, meaning that for each moment that occurs, there is an infinite number of alternative versions of that moment that pre-exist and exist as a potential that were never chosen. So, even if one does perceive a reality where there is only one particular version of that reality, coinciding, coexisting from different perspectives, are also every other possibility of that moment that were never chosen, never experienced, but still existing nonetheless. Now we understand that is an esoteric example, because it does take some movement outside this narrow lane to accept the concept that for every moment there is an infinite number of alternative versions of that moment that could have occurred, but only one of them did occur. However, even so, it is now accepted amongst the leading theoretical physicists on your planet that this is in fact the case. There are an infinite number of versions of every moment. And if this is so, then a space program which is doing all the things which he said does pre-exist. But we also know that this is not just a version of reality that is not occurring, because there is also a space program besides that which is publicly known, which is doing all of the things which we said are being done. Bases on other planets within this system, leaving this system, commerce with other species, mining in other regions of the galaxy, and so on. This revelation and others are soon to be coming into the human consciousness. And many of them will be very difficult to accept as being true. And also, there is going to be the deliberate attempt to contaminate the disclosures so that the truth is muddied and there is so much information which is blended with the truth that it becomes difficult to discern what the truth is. And of course, the cabal of darkness, the unified malevolence, those who are centered around the darkness end of the spiritual spectrum, have as one of their basic tenets the principle of secrecy, and will, as long as they can, protect the truth as much as they possibly can. Therefore, in the early days of this explosion of revelation, use one's discernment such that when new information is made available, that it is not accepted outright, but is instead given the space to grow and gather more evidence, so that the concept itself is developed over time, not immediately accepted, not immediately rejected. Most importantly, when these revelations of what seems to be impossible, what seems could not possibly be the truth, allow it the space to develop over time. Put it on the shelf and wait and see what more information becomes available. And so when more is added to that concept, it can be done so within a ambience internally of possibility, of accepting that there is much about the world which one does not yet understand. And what one does know may be false, may be a form of implanted falsity to hide the truth. Eventually, the cabal of darkness will be nullified as the forces of light grow exponentially on planet Earth and humanity comes together, unified as the single force, the humanity being, and begins to resonate the individual biology with the higher self energetic presence. And so there becomes an alignment in the flow of wisdom from the higher self aspect through the biological. And as a unified single being, the humanity being, a very similar phenomenon takes place. And then also, this humanity being begins to align with the greater aspect of itself, which is the earth being. And so then the wisdom and knowledge of the earth begins to flow through this energetic alignment, through the humanity being, and as such, through each individual human. Then the capacity for revelation will be very profound. And during this period of Renaissance, the truths that will be unpacked and discovered and then incorporated into the identity of the human being and the humanity being will be profound, such that at the end of this period, what each individual thinks of themselves, knows of themselves, believes about themselves, will be markedly different from what each individual human believes at this moment, will consider could be true at this moment. And in this later stage, this exponential explosion of the light, when humanity comes together and all of these alignments occur, in the absence of a forceful darkness, then there will be the freedom to absorb these revelations much more readily, in a state of much greater trust, because the influence of the darkness will have been nullified, and those that are working the mechanism of discovering these truths, unpacking them, and then sharing them will be motivated from the light. And at that time, you will expand in ways which you can not yet imagine, because they are not a part of the human experience at all. Let us finish in this way. The point of this channel is we encourage you to be open. To be open in your considerations and to be open in your acceptance of what could be so. Such that concepts and ideas which seem to be outrageous are not immediately dismissed, but are instead put into a zone where they can sit and allow to mature, to grow, to gather more energy until it becomes clearer if they are true or false. You have been programmed to reject outright things which seem fantastical, which seem outlandish. And we invite you to release that old way and to break free of your programming so that you can begin your expansion into what is possible. And what is possible is much broader than the narrow lane that you have been deliberately blinkered into. And this process of having passed through the many incarnations of darkness and suffering and confusion and chaos, and then emerging in this lifetime out of the darkness into the light through the process of revelation about what is possible, about who you are, why you're here, what's your purpose, what's the history of humanity, what science already exists, what science is possible, what mathematics and physics really dictate or limit, or do they limit. As these become incorporated as answers and understandings and knowings into the human consciousness, humanity will, during this period of Renaissance, go through this period of revelation, which is going to give it a very potent experiential understanding of what it means to be the light, and of course, what it means to be the darkness. And then, when there is the final transition from a third density into fourth density, and humanity is birthed, awakens, rebirths as a fourth density being, no longer spiritually dichotomous, but completely of the light, in a unity of the light, the humanity being, awakened as an aspect individually of the greater being, which is also an aspect of yet a larger group being, which is the earth being. Humanity will be in possession of a very unique form of wisdom, because as the default mechanism for birthing into creation for a new species is to be birthed already in possession of awareness of connection to the one, of connection to each other as the single species, and awareness that they are a being of the light and nothing of the light. So there is no spiritual dichotomy. then there is not the potential for the experience of the light in the context of knowing what the light is not. Meaning that because there is no awareness, no experiential understanding of the darkness, then there is a limited experiential understanding of the light. This makes the light naive. Those that are born into the light are very easy to be manipulated by those who have taken the philosophical pathway of darkness, because as they are focused around the light end of the spiritual spectrum, having been born into creation in this way, being surrounded by their fellow species who are also aligned in this way with the connection to the one, forming the unity, where each individual identifies each other as themselves. And so what one does to another is what they do to themselves. And as they are being of the light, they only do to another actions, gestures, inspirations, which are motivated by the light. And in their entire existence, they have only ever experienced interactions with others, which is also motivated in this way. Then one comes into their midst, which is motivated by the darkness, because they follow the philosophical pathway of darkness. Then these individuals are very vulnerable, are very susceptible to being manipulated, to being exploited, to being selfishly treated, yet without the awareness that this is so when it is done skillfully, because they themselves, within their cultural history and their genetic experience, have no experiential understanding of the darkness, and therefore are very vulnerable. Humanity, however, having passed through the gauntlet of darkness, where they have exploited each other, have had no recognition of connection to the one, connection to each other, perceiving the self as a spiritually dichotomous being, identifying with both the darkness and the light, have much experience of the darkness within themselves, within others, within entire groups, nations, within different ethnicities. And of course, all of this being heightened and exaggerated through the presence of the unified malevolence, the cabal of darkness, and those that are orchestrating, directing that cabal, who recognize very early that a species with the capacity for spiritual dichotomy is an incredible resource for those that are choosing the philosophical pathway of darkness, because they can get an entire planet of sentient species through mechanisms of manipulation to identify with the darkness, and therefore create a dark energy field which empowers those that are the masters of darkness, gives them great dominion and capacity to do as they wish. But this era is coming to an end. And humanity now is in the process of awakening to what has occurred. And it is moving into the light, purging its darkness, bifurcating as a species, until the very vast majority will be aligned to the light, and only a small minority will be left focused around the darkness. And those that remain focused around the darkness will each individually need to take on a much greater load of darkness within themselves to maintain this energetic balance which has existed. Yet, as the darkness sheds individuals into the light, now each individual within the light will find it easier to be a being of the light, because the intensity of the unified force will be so strong, such that the force itself will be more than the sum of the parts. And eventually those centered around the negative end of the spiritual spectrum, the masters of darkness, will crumble, will collapse from the weight of the darkness that they must hold to maintain the potency which is required for them to have any effect within the human reality on earth. And no longer shall they be able to sustain it, and they shall be overwhelmed, and they shall lose their capacities. And then the birth of the new human being will be raced towards through the Renaissance, prior to the rebirth into the fourth density state. This will be the era occurring right now, which signifies the turning point in human history, human future. Right now is the fork in the road. For humanity as a whole, it is a turn in the road, because the future of humanity will be for those that ascend. But for you, the individual, it is a fork in the road, because you can choose to ascend, or you can choose to be recycled back into the third density experience. And those choices are not something that you can choose as a single decision, but will be the accumulation of all the decisions you make from now until the ascension event. Making the choices, which are always of the light, are the preparation for your preparedness. And incorporated into that is the preparation for revelation. Allowing yourself to be open, beginning today, to the many possibilities which before you could not accept as being something that could be real. Open yourself up. Allow possibility to come to you, and then wait to see how it matures before you decide what it is. Thank you, and we love you.